That's not how it works. They do not want to become ulama because it would take too long, and it calls for serious study and the life of practice and dedication to deen and to ilm. You know, once, several years ago, I distributed a questionnaire among an audience of Muslim students at Oxford University before one of my lectures to the Islamic Society there. And the questionnaire had asked the students to tick the correct meanings for several Islamic terms, Islamic terminology. Out of 60 students, 59 knew the meaning of ijtihad, but not one of them knew the meaning of the word istiftah. Yes, not one knew the meaning of the word istiftah. And among these students, there were many who were studying Arabic, who had gone through 2 years of Arabic course in Oxford. Istiftah, the act of seeking fatwa, which is what the general public should be learning, adabul istiftah, before learning anything about ijtihad. Ijtihad is what the scholars do, and istiftah is what the non-scholar does. Now, most major supporters of the Reformation of Judaism had three main concerns. The first was to secure the rights of the Jewish people in European society. The second was to gain acceptability in Germany as Germans. And the third was to become the representatives of the Jewish people to the German authority. And where have I heard that before? Anyway, let me read to you what Paul Mendes-Flohr has written about the Jewish Reformation. And he is a professor of Jewish thought at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. His book is German Jews and Dual Identities. He writes, he says, in hastening to identify with German culture, the German culture, the Jews often viewed their own culture, despite its structural similarities to German humanism, as an impediment, as ill-suited to the cognitive and axiological requirements of the modern world. The tradition and folkways of their ancestral faith were not infrequently regarded as unmodern, even embarrassingly anachronistic. Jews often internalized the negative image of Judaism that prevailed even in enlightened circles. In the extreme, the attendant loss of Jewish self-esteem led to that insidious disease known as Jewish self-hatred. Ludwig Strauss, he writes that the encounter with German culture had given rise to a new type of Jew. Jews who desired to be German to the inner core of their being, while retaining often, despite themselves, a distinctively Jewish sensibility. Another famous Jewish reformer, Edward Gans, who died in 1839, wrote that with the embrace of Europe, Judaism must be prepared to dissolve in the larger whole. This was the demand of history. This is the demand of present-day Europe. The Jews must completely incorporate themselves into the social and cultural fabric of Europe. This demand, the logical consequences of the European principle, must be put to the Jews. Europe would be untrue to itself and to its essential nature if it did not put forth the demand. Now is the time for the demand, and its fulfillment has come. To merge is not to perish. As a stream lives on in the ocean in which it flows, so Judaism will be preserved in the memory and heartbeat of Europe. It is the task of Jewish studies as an academic discipline to ensure that the memory remains alive, and that Europe and Germany remains cognizant of its debt to Judaism. Now, often when you read popular literature on the history of Jews in Germany, you are presented with something similar to the unfolding of a classic Greek tragedy. But when we look at the history, we find that German Jews before Hitler rose to prominence in German society. And they did so by, among other things, compromising on Judaism. Reform Judaism declared that ritual practices had no significance, and instead moral and ethical teachings were more important. Reform synagogues adopted Christian-style worship. As Temkin says, Temkin is another author, he writes that if anything seemed to the reformers to exhibit the darkness of the ghetto, and clinging to the Jews as they sought to climb the ladder of German economic and intellectual life, it was the public ritual of the synagogue, and it was in this area that the first steps to religious reform were directed. The reform directed that musical instruments were brought into the synagogue. Carol singing was accompanied by an organ in the New Israelite Temple Association in Hamburg in 1870. And they made lots of changes at the beginning of the Reformation. Things that are now all undone. They've gone full circle. All the changes that they made at that time, Reformed Judaism, the things that they had taken out are now brought back into the worship. Samuel Holdheim, and this is the one I want to quote, which I think we should pay special emphasis to, special attention, to. And he writes, and I quote, he said, "The present requires a principle that shall clearly enunciate that a law, even though divine, is potent only so as long as the conditions and circumstances of life to meet when it was enacted." And continue. "When these change, however, the law must also be abrogated, even though it has God as its author. The law must also be abrogated, even though it has God as its author. The Talmud speaks with the ideology of its own time, and for that time it was right. I speak for the higher ideology of my time, and for this age I am right," which is exactly how Miss Barnard described the modernists of today, modern Muslims of today. This reasoning is exactly what is being used today by those who want us to give up our heritage. If you juxtapose Holdheim's words next to what many so-called modern experts on Islam are saying, you will find that it's identical. In this is a lesson for us. They did indeed force a reformation on Judaism in Germany, but it did not save the Jews from eventual persecution in that very country. Reformation of Judaism replaced scriptures with a relativistic ideal. Relativism became the new dominant source of inspiration. A relativism that has given the world Zionism and the State of Israel. I'm dreaded to think what similar tragic consequences it will have, this relativism will have for those among us who will follow this path of reformation. Now, the way forward. As minority Muslim communities in the West, I think we need to move forward in the sense that, yes, we have to recognize that we're living in difficult times and pay attention to the crucial issues, not the issues that have been identified by the spin doctors and by people like Cyril Barnard and her prodigies, her people who she is guiding. No, they will not tell us what is important. We have to identify the important issues that we need to focus on, because there's a lot of this is going on now where we find that debates are being restricted, the parameters of the debates are being set, and Muslims are kept in boxes, as you see in her document. We're all placed in different boxes and we're not allowed to leave those boxes. Anyway, I've identified 6 crucial areas that we need to pay attention. And the first is we need to stand firm in faith. Standing firm in faith, as Allah says in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ادخلوا في السلم كافة ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان. Standing firm, coming wholeheartedly into deen, enter into Islam wholeheartedly, and follow not the khutuwat, the plans of shayateen.